friends. Hello, this is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, which is basically just an in conversation series between two writers. Um, when I'm in conversation with somebody live, on stage somewhere, I approach it the same way I approach my podcast, which is maybe I have some questions written down on stage, but I rarely get to them. I just like to just start talking and start connecting with a writer. It's always a good time. Before we get to today's guest, just a reminder, I do have a company called Unbound Writer that does coaching, does retreats, and it has a series of online classes at unboundwriter.com. And in particular, if you're looking for coaching, which is what most people use Unbound Writer for, that is coaching with me one-on-one. And on my website at unboundwriter.com, you can just schedule a complimentary 20-minute consultation call so we can just connect, see if we're a good fit, see what you're looking for, and I can tell you how everything works. So it's obviously very no risk. All right, today on the show, I had Courtney Psak. That is Psak for you following at home. So Courtney is a debut author. She did have a self-published book a few years ago, but she's a debut traditionally published author just this year with her new title, The Tutor. And she has two other books releasing. She signed a 3-book deal. And I met Courtney in January, February of 2025. I was doing an event in South Florida, and she showed up. She showed up early. She sat in the front row, and she just started grilling me in a very good way about, hey, I'm going to be a debut author. What are things that I should be thinking about? So I've known her since then, and then I started seeing her at the conferences throughout the year, and then of course she just launched her debut and just had her on today's podcast. So it was good to not only catch up with her, but to kind of ask her about how has the year been? How has the journey been? What have you learned? What advice would you give to other debuts? She is somebody who is very aware of all the non-writing things that you need to be doing as either a published author or even an aspiring author, i.e. going to these conferences, networking, finding your friend group, but she's also hired her own outside PR team. And, we make the point in the podcast that, you really want to do everything you can to elevate your book to the point that it's in the conversation, whether it's actually talked about or not. It's going to depend on if the book itself resonates. But there's a lot of noise out there in publishing. There's thousands and thousands of books being published every day. How do you get your book to a place where at least rises to the top of what people might be willing to see or might be willing to talk about? And it's a game, and it's certainly more art than science, is something that I've learned over time. But what I know for sure is you have to be doing something, not just writing and assuming the publisher is going to take care of everything else for you. So it was very publishing heavy kind of conversation, which was great. So if you're a debut or if you're an aspiring writer, I think this is going to be a very interesting conversation for you. All right. This is my conversation. You're going to like it. This is my talk with Courtney Psak. You're getting in the role of all the shit that the authors have to do, which
Yeah.
are podcasts. So you just had your debut, or it's not your debut. You had a book before, right?
I self-published a book, yeah, like in my mid-20s.
So I guess technically this is, I don't know, however you want to define
This is
it.
my first traditional published
Yes,
debut.
right, right. And this one leans, I mean, obviously I read it. This one leans more thriller, mystery, suspense than your self-published.
Yeah, my self-published was like a rom-com, but this is more of where, this is more of what I read and this is where I want to write.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. My impression of you, so we met in Florida, right? We met at that event that I did,
Yeah,
Palm
live
Beach or
event.
something like that.
Mhm.
Um, and then I remember we started talking, we talked about PR stuff, and I think you're with K now,
I am.
K Publicity. Um,
And I love them. Thank you so much for that recommendation. It was the best
yeah,
advice
I
I think
mean,
I've gotten in my whole publishing journey.
Yeah, yeah, and let's dig into that a little bit in a minute because I think that's an important topic. Because it's just I like talking to debut authors because I think it's interesting to see like, hey, this is all the stuff you need to be doing. It's really the
Yeah,
writing is the hardest part, but it's also just a small part of it all.
it is.
And when I look at you, I see somebody who's just diving in, right? Like
Yep.
Thriller Fest, BoucherCon, networking, making friends, getting blurbs, all, getting the PR team all set. Um, that's pretty rare, I'd say. I think for most people, certainly for me, that was just an evolution, a learning process. I mean, I guess I started going to conferences before I published, and that was great. And have you felt like, oh my God, I'm so glad I went, or because it's not cheap?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the thing you kind of have to realize with publishing. I mean, you're really investing in yourself. And, when I actually do get a check, I'm like, oh, wait, I got paid for this one? Like,
Right,
it's very
right.
rare. And thank you again, speaking of which, for my blurb that you did for the tutor. It
Yeah,
was
of course,
amazing. I really
of
loved
course.
that. Yeah, I never knew about conferences before until I got my agent, and told me I should start going to these things. And yeah, before that, it was so isolating. You have no idea what to do. And then you go to these places and you're talking to other authors and agents, and you find your tribe. And it's really helpful to just, talk to everyone about their journeys and their advice. And yeah, it's been really, really helpful throughout this.
Yeah, your phrase "invest in yourself" I think is well taken. And it's a guess, I think, ultimately, because yes, you have to invest in yourself, and you're going to, for most authors, and maybe I'm just speaking mostly from my experience, but I think from a lot of authors, it's a net loss for years, right? You're investing
Oh,
and you're
yeah.
investing, you're investing, you're making royalties, you're making advances, sure, but you know, for most people, they're pretty small relative to what your outflow is. Um, Certainly when you start getting to the point where you're investing in like third party PR firms and things like
Mhm.
that. And so it's a very long term game plan. I think where it gets scary and what the unknown part is how much do you invest that's based on your own ego? Um, and that's really hard to parse out. And an example of which is so I get invited to festivals, right? I'm like, oh, that's cool. I get to be on stage. I'll get interviewed. Look at me. And then you realize, like, oh, what they paid me versus what I spent to go. I'm out of pocket $1,500, $2,000 on this.
Exactly.
Is this a wise move? And it's hard to say no to opportunities. It's hard to say no to something where you're investing in yourself. Have you run into that where you're feeling like maybe I shouldn't do this one, but I'll do this thing?
Yeah, I've been kind of, up in the yeah. This year has been just the year of yes. So to
Okay,
kind of
and
give,
as it should be, I think.
yeah, to kind of give, your audience some background, I was fortunate enough to get a three-book deal with Hodder and Stoughton, who are a UK-based publisher. And I had literally stalked Carter when he showed up at Palm Beach Library for his event. And I showed up a half hour earlier and kind of explained, like, what can I be doing? Because especially with my publisher and my agent in the UK, I was like, I am all by myself over here. I have
Yeah.
no idea what I should be doing. And you thankfully had told me you got to get a publicity agent and you recommended Dana Kay. I've had nothing but wonderful experience with her and her
Right.
team, which has been helpful. But yeah, and then again, it's attending these conferences, and it part of it, I guess, is a bit of like ego. I mean, anytime you're on a panel, you're taking a picture and putting it on social media.
Sure.
But those it's also the connection you get with the audience members. It's the connection you get with people there that are huge. You're really with your targeted audience there. These are people that are interested in this genre. So, and they want to have a book by somebody that they met that they can sign. And then hopefully in that point, when they're reading it, they enjoy it and start following you more. But I think it's also just really important from a networking perspective. Again, not only from a professional side with the authors, but also connecting with those readers and those
Yeah, and that's a
influencers.
good point. Hopefully they'll like it. I mean, because that's the thing. And I don't want to suggest to listeners that, if you're not getting your own third-party PR firm, you're doing it wrong.
No, not at all.
That's
You
a
can do a lot
luxury.
with these. You can do a lot with these conferences. I've met a lot of people and then gone to my PR team and been like, "Hey, by the way, let's get a blurb with this person that I just met. By the way, I'm going to be going to this thing. Can you guys organize it? So you can do a lot for yourself as well.
Yeah, and you can recognize who the influencers are on Instagram, for example, and ask your publisher to send galleys to those people if they're not already doing that. So there's a lot that you can do on your own. For me, it was always like I had a corporate job, I was well paid. I'm like, I have the luxury of doing this. And you get into this mental space where you kind of are now, where you're like, you don't know what it's going to how it's going to sell, you don't know what the world is kind of like.
Yeah.
And so my thought was always like, let's give this book the best opportunity, if I can afford it, let's give this book the best opportunity I can to get into the conversation.
Yeah.
If it becomes a conversation topic, that's based on, to your point, do they like the book? Is it a book that resonates? And sometimes it takes years, and it's just like you just keep at it, and suddenly people are like, oh yeah, I know that name. I've seen that name around, and my 10th book was my breakout. So it's like
Yeah.
you never know. But I think to invest yourself continuously, if you can afford it, and there are varying levels of it, is a smart thing to do.
Yeah, and it's all about timing. So like I had mentioned earlier, when I was 25, I self-published a novel, and that was really helpful for me just to understand just the inner workings of the industry and realize that it's not just here, I wrote a book and now I'm gonna just, wait for you to sell me millions of copies. Like you realize what you have to
Right.
do. And kind of after I did that, I realized like, oh wow, this is a lot of work.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna
Self-publishing
wait.
is a lot of work,
Yeah,
from what I
but and
understand.
ideally it was like, okay, maybe the next time around I want to be traditionally published, but at the same time, it's not going to be you're still going to be doing a lot of work. So I kind of held off and I was like, my husband and I were talking about having kids at the time, so I was like, I'm going to have my kids, have them go to school, so I have the time to write the books and also realizing, the amount of money that I had put into self-publishing, it was going to be very similar. So I did kind of wait on the timing and when I could invest in myself for that.
And you've been on this track, right? Because you got your master's in publishing. Is that correct?
I did. And it's funny, a lot of people ask, like, was it worth having your master's? And, I got my master's in 2008 during the financial crisis,
Right.
first of all. And so a lot of connections that I made there kind of fell to the wayside. But also, the industry has changed so much then.
It changes every 5 years.
Exactly. So it is really hard to see, whether that is still resonate with people. I'm sure it's a plus just from a mere of networking and connections and things like that. But for me, it was a tough time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And, but there is even the knowledge of it changing all the time is help. I mean, because when I started, I had no idea about I didn't know what the publishing industry was. And you kind of come in with this perception that there are these mechanisms in place to create buzz, I mean, there's all this stuff that you think, and some of it's true, but really it's just opaque. Really, you can be as scientific as you want, but publishers are kind of guessing, just like the rest of us.
Of course.
And that's frustrating and also kind of beautiful at the same time, because I think what that means for authors is if you stick with writing what you love and you're, aware of the market, but not writing to the market, and you just keep at it, you never know. The best can always be yet to come. And I think that's wonderful. It's not like, well, if your fourth book hasn't hit, then by industry standards, you're out, you
No,
know?
I agree. So going back to the book that I self-published, it was a rom-com and I actually, started querying it and I had two agents come back to me and say like this is a really good book, but it was around the time like unless you were writing 50 Shades or Twilight, like they didn't want anything to do with it. But it was that agent that said you should self-publish and when I finally did, it found its market. I sold 6,000 copies in the first 3 months. I haven't been able to do it with my traditionally published book
Well,
yet.
yeah, that's
You know, you
just
just
for clarity, that's a big number, right? And if you're selling 2,500 copies traditionally, I mean, you want to sell more than that, but I mean, like when we look at long-term averages, that's a number that gets thrown out a lot.
Mhm.
It's not a lot. It's not what people think. So 6,000 as a
Yeah.
self-published for a first book where you have an unknown name is pretty significant for sure.
Yeah, I mean, BookBub promotion helped as well, for sure.
Book bubs are great,
They're
and
amazing.
And just to clarify for the audience, a book bub
Yeah.
is you're promoting, you have to be accepted, but you're promoting your ebook. So it's discounted to 99 cents, $1.99. So it's not as much money, but you can sell thousands of copies. And
Yeah.
it's usually
And
discounted for like a week?
yeah, and you get to choose the week. So in that case, my rom-com book was like it was like a resolutions book. It was about this
Oh,
woman
so
who, yeah, so
New
I
Year's.
kind of timed, I'm sorry?
So you've timed it for New Year's kind of a thing?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so between Christmas and New Year's, it ran and then, it took off. And I remember in 2017, I went to a pitch conference when I was pregnant with my son. And that was after also I realized, okay, yeah, I got to wait till after I have my kids in school. But I remember them telling me that domestic thrillers were, falling to the wayside, that everyone was sick of them, and they were still going strong. So always write what you love to read, and you're going to find other people agree.
I think that's true. I think that's because if you start reading reviews, not only of your book, but others, or following Instagram thriller influencers, and you start to kind of try to game the system by figuring out what people want, it just doesn't work because people just want, my impression is people want something that hits them as I've seen this trope, I haven't seen it done this way. I think is important. And then I think there needs to be some kind of emotional resonance, whether
Mhm.
that's the emotion of fear or dread, or you just long for this character. If your character is some kind of makes some kind of emotional connection, which I don't know how you how you formulaically approach that. I think it has a better shot of hitting. But I think if you're just painting by numbers,
Yeah, no, it
people
gets
are going to
tough.
forget your book.
Yeah. I mean, my writing process is I know you're a pantser, but I kept writing myself into corners and it didn't work for me. So I'm
Yeah.
an outliner, but also just very basic in the fact that it's just all I'm doing is writing one scene for each chapter that needs to move the story forward. After
Yeah.
that, like I do creative free will. But after I do that outline, I have to write the first 10,000 words and then I take a break and stop and go, okay, now here are my characters all introduced. What sort of trauma have they dealt with that they would like force them to move forward with this story, or what makes them find this acceptable? And yeah, you have to really dig into the emotional side of, how would someone tolerate this? What's their threshold? Things like that.
And I think that's a good point, writing 10,000 words and then reflecting. I just did a post about this. You have to be in the act of writing, I think, whether you outline or not, to figure it out.
Yeah.
I'm 30,000 words into something and I'm like, it feels weird, it doesn't feel right. And then you just keep writing and all of a sudden you're like, oh, maybe it's about this. And I
Yeah.
don't think I would have had that moment had I
Yep.
not just kind of kept aimlessly typing, you know?
I had a book that I wrote, it was one of many that I threw out, just as teaching you everything. And it was one character, that one backstory that I went, oh, this should be its own story. And then I wrote a
Right.
whole book about that.
And it takes a while to get to that point, I think. And you know, I've tried outlining like you. Like you have to be faithful to how your own brain works
Mhm.
and not try to force a methodology that isn't you. And I'm trying to outline a little bit more just because the publisher wants to know what I'm writing. Um, and then inevitably I'm like 4 chapters in, I'm like, oh no, it's going a totally different direction. But I'm like, all right, well,
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that happens, and a lot of
yeah.
times the publisher will say, "Okay, it was for the better."
Yeah, and I've had times where it wasn't for the better, and I'm just like, "This is what I wrote,"
Yeah.
and it wasn't well received. I'm like, "Well, that's data for me, right? That's a
Mhm.
learning lesson, but it was what I wanted to write, and what just, you know, and that I think you learn over time is just like how true to yourself can you be, and how much do you have to listen to your agent, your editor, and stuff like that, and you signed a 3 book deal, so there are expectations of like, okay, these are going to be the types of books that we're going to be getting. Do you find, I'm sure you're already either done with them all or almost done with them all. They're all coming out next year, right? The other two?
Yeah, so
So they're
the
done.
tutor came out in the US November 11th, January 15th, audio and digital for the Hostess, with the paperback in the US coming out April 21st, and then yeah, and June for the third one.
So they're all done. So what's the next step then for you after these three?
I've written three more that I just passed off to my agent, and we're gonna try and go again. But you know what's really funny is, so I wrote the one that comes out in June. I just got those notes from my publisher the week that the tutor was publishing in the US. So I was really busy that week, and I was like, okay, I'm not gonna be able to look at this. I'm like traveling to Tampa, and I've got my launch in Miami. And then my kid's school had a week off for Thanksgiving, and we were flying home to New Jersey. So I was like, I know I only had like 3 weeks to do this. So I'm like, all right, let me look at her notes and just make sure nothing's crazy. And they looked very, very fine. So I'm like, okay, I've got nothing to worry about. But I hadn't looked at this book in 3 years. And even my own writing style has changed so much that when I went to go look at these edits, I was like, oh my God. I was like, I have to redo this in 3 weeks. Like I was getting up at 2:30 in the morning just to have 4 hours where there was no distraction. And I had to Frankenstein this whole thing. Like I kept the story, but I had like the one first half was one character, the second half was another character. And I'm like, but what if they don't like the second character? What if someone doesn't like the first? They don't even get there. So I had to run this like parallel with them, but you have
But
to make
that was
sure
a
that,
self-imposed note. So you're saying that
yes,
the editor didn't say that. So
no,
you could have done 3 days or a week's worth of work and been fine according to them, but
yeah.
you
But you know,
destroyed
it
yourself.
was just also very different from the tutor and the hostess, and I want to be true to the readership that I'm developing too.
Yeah.
So I'm also trying to keep in line with that.
That is hard when you get to a certain phase in the publication of your book. So I just got copy edits in, and you don't touch anything at the copy edit phase.
No, yeah.
And then you see certain things you're like, that's a shitty sentence. Like, and it's like, okay, just you have to let it go. And that's a hard thing to do. I assume when you rewrote to the extent that you rewrote that third book, you checked in with them first and
Oh
said,
yeah, I said I was like, by the way, we're going to line edits next. So this was the first overall look that the
right,
editor was
right.
doing. But I said to her, I was like, yeah, I just looked at this. You're gonna get a very different book in a couple weeks.
Wow.
But explained how and why I was doing it. I was like, and also the note she had, what I was gonna do was gonna answer it was gonna cover all those issues. So
Yeah.
I was like, so it
Okay.
was helpful.
Well, that's good. And when did you have time to write three more books after that?
It's just kind of my kids go to school and I set an alarm on my phone for when I have to pick them up. But
Wow.
I'm a fast writer when I actually sit down and do it. So like my
Yeah.
process is when I'm trying to come up with an idea, I go for a lot of walks, listen to a lot of like suspenseful music that just
Hmm.
reminds me to stay on track and not worry about the grocery list. And
Hmm.
then I do the outline. And then when I actually sit down to do it, I do that first draft in like 3 to 4 weeks. But again, like I'm talking bare
That's
bones. Like
crazy.
I don't
Like how
write
many
any,
words would that be?
like 65,000.
In 3 to 4 weeks? Jesus.
Yeah. I can be a psycho when I get it done. My kids don't want like I fortunately don't even have a door on my office. So my kids come in, I'm like, nope, like I've got to
Yeah,
keep
right.
writing.
Tase them.
Yeah, but then after that, then I take a week off and then I go back and then I do right now with my book six before I send it to my agent, I'm doing what like make it pretty. So it's like, all right, now I have to actually describe what they're wearing, what they look like, what
Yeah.
the scene is, and that's where it starts to get a little more. But even then, like my agent's first notes come back to me is like, you forgot to talk about what this person looks like. You forgot to talk about the scene that they're in. And I'm like, oh
Yeah.
shoot, okay.
Yeah. So you're writing a screenplay, a detailed screenplay,
Yeah,
essentially.
everyone says that. I was
Here's
like,
the
but I don't know
here's
how
the
to write a
plot points.
screenplay. I gotta, I guess, learn that.
Well, I mean, that's how I kind of approach writing in general because I don't describe a lot of things. I'm just like, how do I convey it without going deep into descriptions and things like that? So I see everything very cinematically when I'm writing, and then how do I convey the camera shot without going into detail of every little thing? Um, and again, it's just how you evolve and how your brain works. It's not necessarily something that I set out to do.
Yeah.
But that's a fast pace. Like it takes me, if I'm locked in, I'm 6 to 7 months for a first draft. But then I find that my first draft is 90% of the way there, as far
Yeah.
as
See,
I can take it.
mine's 30%
Yeah.
when it's done.
Um, But then, yeah, and then you turn it in, and then you're like, I'm not done with this. This is the best that I can do. And then
Yeah,
your editor or your agent or whatever is going to give you notes. You're like, oh, thank you for seeing something
exactly.
I didn't see. It makes a huge difference. It's a lot of work.
No, I love that. People say, like, do you like the editing process? I'm like, I love when they come back and they tell me, like, you need to do a backstory for this character. And I didn't even think about that before. I'm like, you're right. I should. I enjoy all of those notes because I'm talking to people that know what they're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
I think,
totally. Well,
yeah,
and they are looking at it from a much more commercial aspect than you're looking at it from.
exactly.
So you might have a conflicting note, or you note that like doesn't whatever. I've never really had that, but you see it from the eyes of somebody who's actually selling a lot of books,
Mhm.
and you're like, oh, okay. And then you that ingrains in you after a while. I want
Yeah.
to see more of this relationship, maybe, or things like that, or spend less time in a character's head because it's slowing things down. Um, I'm curious, just kind of, again, we met, I guess that was like January or February, something like that. And now you're recently launched.
Mhm.
What has surprised you the most about that whole process?
Um, I don't think it was so much a surprise, so much just yeah, the traveling that I've been doing and going to these conferences, I'm kind of kicking myself that I never knew about them before
Yeah.
and never was part of these organizations because I felt so isolated in what I was
Yeah.
doing. And to kind of meet a full community of people, like it was a very pleasant surprise. I went through, going through the process of, querying agents, and I'm like, there are conferences that you can actually go to and like talk
Talk to
face to
them.
face with. Like that
Yeah.
seems so much better.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great. And so now you'll be a debut with ITW next year.
Yes,
Yeah. That'll be part of that.
I know. I'm excited.
That'll be fun. Yeah. It's a crazy process. And I feel like there's always opportunities to learn, but and it's weird when the book comes out because there's something about like the next day, of like, not, and I don't think the word disappointment is right, but you've been building for months to a year to 18
Mhm.
months, and then it's just out, and you're like, all right, it's
Well,
totally out of my control at this point.
Well, especially having, again, like a UK publisher. So my book came out in the UK, like audio digital paperback in August 7th.
Right.
And it was like this half publishing in the US where the audio and digital available, but the paperback itself didn't come out till November 11th. So
Yeah.
it was this weird, like, I'm out, but I'm not.
Right.
And yeah, like,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. And trying, yeah, because my second book was with a UK publisher, and I kind of went through that a little bit with Severn House. Um, it is weird. It also feels fancy. You're like, oh, I have a UK publisher. I don't know. Somehow it sounds cool.
yeah, well, I mean, what happened was I queried like 143 agents and
Mhm.
was getting crickets. And finally I went, well, some of my favorite authors are in the UK. So while the US has the biggest publishing industry, they have, especially when it comes to, thrillers and suspense, they have a huge market there. So I was like, I'm going for it.
Yeah. And my impression and what I've heard, and I don't know if I actually know this, is that the UK market for thrillers appreciates probably a darker space than
Mhm.
maybe the US audience. Have you found that at all? Have you had any feedback about that?
I haven't really. I mean, I try not to go to like my books don't really have a lot of like really I actually did an article, a guest post for Writer's Digest about how I kind of avoid gore and sex and
Yeah.
like extreme violence. Obviously my characters have some tragic backstories that we obviously have
Sure.
to touch on, but for the most part, I try to avoid those things and really just focus on like kind of the Hitchcock suspense,
Yeah.
put the bomb under the desk
Right.
rather than
And
on
let
top.
let us see it. Yeah. Yeah. And I think I would probably posit that Americans probably have a bigger appetite for the actual visceral, which, and I try to avoid that too, because I think it's much more interesting just to have this innate sense of dread throughout. And then when something does happen, and it might only happen once per book, it's
Mhm.
impactful. but I think, my impression of the UK audience is that they have more of an appetite or more of a willingness to have this kind of, and then and the Scandinavians are the same way, more of a sense of hopelessness is okay. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
have to have the happy ending that I think this is totally a broad stroke comment that happy ending that Americans I think probably appreciate more. I've had that feedback of even from my agents, like you have to change the ending. She's like, this could fly in the UK, but this is not going to fly anywhere else.
Really? See, I like the happy ending,
Yeah,
but and I like having everything wrapped up. Unless I'm dealing with a series, I kind of get like frustrated, like, oh my God, I got all the way to the end and it's life sucks, then you die. Like
right,
that's
right,
just kind of me as a readership. But at the same time, like that book's not going to become a Netflix series anytime soon because I already
right.
wrapped everything up.
Right.
So it's harder to kind of so you have to find the right balance. But I mean, even now, I mean, horror's taking over right now is like a huge trend. So I think we're even kind of from the US side getting into more of the heavy dark stuff as well.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And I think that the definition of horror isn't what people would traditionally consider it to be.
Yeah.
Because, you look at a lot of our colleagues, I would probably even lump myself in there. Like, a lot of my stuff has been kind of said, tinged with horror, even though I don't write a lot of gore or anything like that. So I think horror can just be very psychologically
Yeah,
driven,
I think it's
whereas
very psychologically driven. You're right.
so, and then if you're somebody like Stephen Graham Jones, you can have a splatterpunk novel, which is very clearly horror,
Yeah.
versus like a psychological thriller, which is just crazy disturbing that some people can call it horror. But yeah, again, you write kind of what feels good to you, and
Mhm.
you hope there's an audience for it. I think if you try to just target it, and it's not your wheelhouse or it's not how your brain works, I think it shows. It becomes a very two-dimensional kind of a story, I think.
Very true.
So
Yeah, I try to find the balance with the psychological and the suspense and you know,
yeah. If you sit
yeah.
there and just say, what would I do? Which is all I do when I'm writing, then it becomes kind of interesting because then it does become even though you're not the character, if you're empathetic enough where you can embody their character long enough to get through the story and make choices for them from your own viewpoint, I think then you do tap into that emotion. Then you do tap into that connectivity with the reader.
Because the
Um,
readers are doing that for themselves anyway when they so
exactly.
want them to have that emotional connection for sure.
Exactly, but it has to be written well enough where they're able to. Because I've read books where it's very plot driven and it's a very competent, if not engaging plot. But at the end, I just felt I was reading a Mad Lib. Like I didn't feel like connected. Like you have to care about what happens to the main person. Like whether you like them or not is irrelevant, but you have to
Yeah.
be invested in what happens. And
One of the hardest things I kind of came across when I was writing suspense was, you try to go between that unreliable narrator. You're trying to make your character like you don't want in one instance you may even want your main character to be the suspect and the unreliable narrator. And there's a really tough balance where how do you make them likable but unlikable?
right.
Kind of Gillian Flynn's sort of style where
Yeah, no, I agree. But I think the reality of it is, I think we all are unreliable narrators, right? We are
yes.
not all one way or another way. We can make decisions that contradict what most people would assume we would do because we're human, not because we're nefarious necessarily, but that's just in that moment. And so I think if you write from that place of humanity, and really tap into the emotions, you can make an unreliable narrator who is very relatable because it just feels like, yeah, if this one thing had happened in my life, I can see me making this same decision. That's where I think it becomes very interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, I wrote an article for Book Trip about, when I was writing The Tutor and how the mother-in-law is a mother-in-law in general is a great unreliable narrator because, you know, this is their child. They can't, they've got rose-colored glasses on. They can't imagine that they would do something bad. But if they do something bad, then it's also this whole, well, whose fault is it? Is it my fault the way I raised them? Is
Right.
it their fault? So it got really fun to write her as a character because, like you said, you can be
Oh, I
very
love that.
unreliable.
I love that. Well, Courtney, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do our little storytelling. I'm going to
Okay.
just pick a book that's within arm's reach of me.
Okay.
So I'm going to choose a book. We're going to choose a page. I'm going to choose a sentence. I'm going to read that sentence. Then it'll be the first sentence in like a 2 minute long short story. We'll just alternate sentences back and forth. It'll be terrible. It'll be fun. It'll be great. And then when it goes off the rails, I'll call it a day and then we'll wrap it ourselves. So let me see. All right. I'm gonna grab this came out this year. Chris Pavone's The
Ooh.
Doorman. Just spoke to him on the podcast and he was great. Um,
Yeah, he's someone I'd love to meet.
yeah, he's a really nice guy. Um, so give me a number between 1 and 375.
350.
I'm going to quickly scan 350, which is the beginning of chapter 54. Um, you can do whatever you want with this. Um, oh God, there's even more. Wow, there's a lot of good stuff.
Oh.
All right, I'm changing my mind. I'm going to go with this sentence. It's a fragmented sentence. Simply blood all over everything.
Ooh, okay.
For somebody who doesn't write a lot of violence and gore.
Blood all over everything. That is what she saw in her vision when she saw her hands, her her skin, and the body on the floor.
Marissa opened her eyes and she was surprised that they were even closed. The vision was so powerful, a vision that she had never had before. She'd never had one in her entire life. She flirted with the idea that none of this was real, but she could jump back into that vision very quickly, and she knew who exactly that body belonged to.
It was the woman staring across from her on the bus that she had never met before in her life, and
Hmm.
she contemplated whether or not she should warn her of this vision that she's never had before, has no understanding of, but feels like she must tell her.
What is my responsibility? She thought. Surely, if I just go up to her and tell her what I saw, she's going to she's going to ask the bus to stop and run away. Maybe by even me mentioning it to her is what puts her whole misfortune in play. Marissa stared at her own feet, knowing her stop was next, and she had to make a decision.
Mm. She decides not to say anything, and the woman in front of her stands up as well. They step off the bus, and just as she's about to tell her, the woman crosses the street without looking and is struck by a car.
I think we call
Blood.
it there. Wow, you went straight for it. Well, I don't know if Marissa could have done anything to stop that. That woman had it coming. Who just steps in front of the car without looking? Well, Courtney, it was a pleasure to catch up with you, and it was
You
good to
as
see you
well.
throughout 2025. And I'm sure we are going to be seeing each other in 2026 as
Of
well.
course, I'm excited to see you at Thriller Fest.
It'll be fun. It'll be yep. So the debut, ITW does it right for debut, so we'll have a good time.
I'm excited.
All right, thanks for talking. We'll chat soon. All right, that is it. That is my conversation with Courtney Psak. I thought we did well with that storytelling. That person met a very quick end to their life. Rightfully so. I mean, that person kind of seemed a little stupid. All right, so Courtney's latest novel, or her debut novel, The Tutor, is out. She has two more coming out soon. You can find everything you want to know about her at her website at CourtneyPsak.com. And just as a reminder, the spelling of her last name is Psak. And if you're interested in my books, my newsletter, other episodes of Making It Up, just head on over to CarterWilson.com. Or if you're interested in writing coaching, online courses, or writing retreats, you can check out my company at UnboundWriter.com. That is it. I am leaving the country tomorrow. But rest assured, another episode will be out just next week. In the meantime, as always, friends, take care.